I want to welcome all of you to send a sincere welcome to all of you for taking the time out of your day to attend this panel discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusivity in law enforcement. I am Thomas McMillan, the Lieutenant for Cuyahoga Community College, Campus Police and Security Services. Just a few house notes today. Please mute your volume. And if you have any questions and comments, go ahead and place them in the chat. Today, I will be moderating this conversation on DEI. It's a very sensitive topic, one that needs to be discussed. I will make a valiant effort to navigate a panelist through this conversation to pull back the layers, hopefully shed some light on intersectionality of race, culture, gender, law enforcement. Hopefully we can learn from the best practices for diversity, equity, inclusivity in our police departments across the country. Before I get started though, I would be remiss if I failed to neglect two instrumental people who helped orchestrate this conversation. I'd like to recognize Magda Gomez, who serves as the Executive Director for Cuyahoga Community College and Diversity, Equity, and Ryan Zimler, who's the Director for Race, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the United Way of Greater Cleveland. Upon conclusion of this discussion, Ryan will also provide closing comments. Lastly, I also want to recognize and say that this is a sponsored event by the Stand for Justice, Social Justice Alliance at Cuyahoga Community College, Noble, the national organization of Black law enforcement executives, the Greater Cleveland chapter, and the United Way of Greater Cleveland. Thank you to all those organizations for supporting this endeavor and assisting us with marketing and advertising. Today, I would like to introduce three very dynamic law enforcement executives who I consider to be progressive and leading their organizations with distinction and absolute honor. Gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'm going to be chivalrous today and refer to our very first panelist as Sheriff Kandy Fatheree. She assumed the office in 2021 for Summit County Sheriff's Office. She is the first female sheriff in Summit County history, and only one of three in the state of Ohio. As sheriff of the fourth largest county in the state, she oversees the largest government office in the county, with nearly 400 deputies and civilian employees under her command. Sheriff Fatheree is also the graduate of the prestigious FBI National Academy for Executive Leadership in in Quantico, Virginia. As a part of her campaign, Sheriff Fatheree's platform consisted of reform and rejuvenation, with a particular emphasis on increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the sheriff's office. Early in her tenure, Sheriff Fatheree created the administration position of Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who today works with her to implement a multi-pronged program, DEI program, to approach encompassing in-service training, diversity, recruitment, retention, policy and procedural reform, and innovative forms of community outreach. Welcome, Sheriff Fatheree.
Thank you.
Next, we have Commander Redhorse, who I want to apologize. I've called every title except the newest one. So, Commander Redhorse, welcome from New Mexico. You are a 15-year member of the Navajo Police Department, the largest tribal police agency with jurisdiction in 3 states. Commander Redhorse holds a post commission in the Navajo Nation, Arizona State, the Federal Special Law Enforcement Commission. He has worked with multiple law enforcement entities, partners, nonprofit organizations, and the community to combat crime and disparate social-based issues facing the Diné. Commander Redhorse holds a master's degree from Arizona State University is a 40 under 40 IACP recipient, a graduate of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Office of Justice Services Command School, and a graduate of the Northwestern School of Police Staff and Command. Known for his professionalism and dedication, Commander Redhorse is frequently sought out by his peers, supervisors, and outside department staff for his guidance and expertise. Welcome, Commander Redhorse.
Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Last but absolutely not least, I have sitting next to me as Deputy Chief Victor McDowell, who has 25 years of public safety service experience. He currently is the Deputy Chief of Metropolitan Housing Police Department in Cleveland, Ohio. Victor earned his BA Management from Indiana Wesleyan University. He received his MA in Psychology from Cleveland State University, with specialization in diversity management. Victor is graduate 274th session of the FBI National Academy. Victor currently serves on the executive board of Naval Police Chapter as the second vice president. He is a member of the OACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the FBI National Associates Incorporated. Welcome.
Yes, thank you for the introduction.
Let's dive right into this conversation. I want to thank all our panelists for being here and all the online guests being part of this conversation. But my first question, and I want to ask this question to Sheriff Fatheree, but please briefly describe your agency and what makes your organization unique, and what has influenced your thinking around diversity, equity, and inclusivity.
Well, first of all, we have about 330 deputies. All of our deputies are law enforcement. And then we have about 80 civilian employees. It has traditionally always been predominantly white male with a spattering of female and minorities. That has changed as time has gone on. In the last year, what has made it unique is my dedication towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've hired more than 50% of the people that we've hired in this last year have been women and minorities. And I think that I actually, in the last year, have promoted more women and minorities than we have ever done in our history as well. So unique. The Sheriff's Office is responsible for the jail, court security. We track all of the sex offenders, violent offenders, and we patrol and keep the peace in 4 different communities within our county.
Thank you, Sheriff Fatheree. Commander Redhorse, I pose the same question to you. You and I have had some pretty good discussions, but what makes your organization unique, and what has influenced your thinking around diversity, equity, and inclusivity?
Thank you, Thomas, and indeed, thank you for inviting me into your space. So the Naval Police organization is the largest tribal police program within the United States, and we have jurisdiction in Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. We have over 220 sworn covering those respective areas, and for us, a quarter of our program is female. And us as Dene have a really solid view that matrilineal leadership is quite important to us. We have a number of female chief of police. We have a number of our current captains who are female. And in turn, we also want to assure that we respect the alternative viewpoint of law enforcement as a whole that a Native American community can bring into its program. Our viewpoint is not necessarily that we have to handcuff people, arrest people, take them to corrections. We want to restore harmony within the household. And as a result, the uniqueness of our law enforcement program is we take our cultural traditional teachings of our progenitors and we apply it to our everyday professional policing. So we build a permutation between our Western Eurocentric practices of law enforcement and that our grandparents and our foremothers and forefathers have taught us. When it comes to our aspect of encouraging diversity, inclusion, and equity, we always want to assure that we take a very good snapshot of our population. So you would think that as a Naval Police organization, as a Diné police organization, that we would focus only on Navajos, Navajo preference. However, a good portion of our service population are married into our culture, who are Caucasian, who are African American, who are Hispanic, and in turn they bring their viewpoint, their cultural viewpoint into how we engage in policing here. In addition to it, our new chief of police has kicked off numerous programs to focus on domestic violence processes, ensuring that the victims have a seat in our decision calculuses, while also ensuring that we open a dialogue with the LGBTQI community as well. So even in those facets, we're expanding our reach in how we want to assure that we become more inclusive as an organization.
Thank you, Commander. Very fresh perspective on that. Thank you very much. So, Deputy Chief, Mr. McDowell, I intentionally made sure that we had different types of law enforcement organizations here. And so you are the Deputy Chief for public housing.
Yes. So I serve as the Deputy Chief of Police for the fourth largest housing authority in the United States. Our demographic primarily is 95% African American. We're situated here in Cleveland City Center, but we have properties throughout Cuyahoga County. On average, our count is about 55,000 residents that we service. And I use the word service because what we really focus on is providing a service versus a program. And what really makes us unique is I have to give my chief, Andres Gonzalez, credit for developing the police assisted referral program, which is really considered a promising practice for engaging communities. And so what that means is that our police officers serve as first responders when it comes to crisis. And often what that means is once we move beyond the determination of arrest, once we move beyond the determination whether they should be provided with alternative services, whether that means going to the hospital or some other placement, we take the liberty of really evaluating what that particular person needs and ensuring that they are service connected through our partnerships that we have to actually have someone follow up with them. And there are other law enforcement communities who are really trying to model what our officers do. But at the heart of it, you really have to have a genuine concern for the people that you service. And you have to look at all aspects of law enforcement and the demographics of whom you're servicing and base your practices and your service level on engaging those particular demographics.
So you have to have a genuine concern for the people you serve. Yeah, so on a personal level, I'm just gonna throw this question out there. What impact does DEI have on you? What makes you want to adopt this approach and implement these theories into your police department? Commander Redhorse.
So I think for the most part, it firmly establishes that holistic equity between people. Here on Navajo Indian country, we believe that all people are five-fingered people, regardless of your cultural background, your socioeconomic conditions, regardless of your structural experiences. And that's the base of where we decide to begin our interaction with our public. And when we begin in that way, we want to assure that we're not closing doors, we're not building walls. We're ensuring that we're utilizing those skill sets of verbal connectedness, of engaging a network that's beyond judgment to assure that we create that harmonious balance within our community. Because you have to remember that we're geographically dispersed. So it can potentially take me upwards of 4 hours just to drive to one call. So I have to resolve the question right then and there. And I have to assure that we utilize our entire criminal justice support network that's based upon restorative justice processes. For us, our knowledge and aspects of peacekeeping for purposes of that particular home. And for us, we want to engage what we call Capt. That is to say, the restorative harmony within the home that accentuates the beauty of living in life. And all of that within that one word. So the only way we can do that is by changing our police methodologies and by assuring that we give everyone an equal shake by understanding that we all start at the base of being five-fingered people. And that's the cultural paradigm that we bring forward as a Native American law enforcement community. Given the fact that we touch urban areas where there's significant population density to where there's areas with low population density, we also have that aspect of identifying cultural permutations, because some of our youth that are under age 18 have really adopted Western-centric practices, and they don't understand what our core cultural traditions are. So even at law enforcement level, we're having to become flexible and understanding where they're coming from as well. Because what my great-grandfather would have taught me is not necessarily applicable to some of the youth that are being brought up now. So I think that's one of the aspects that's important to us. Maintaining our cultural values while ensuring that we adopt a flexibility for the next generation that's being brought up within the confines of Navajo Nation.
Thank you, Commander Redhorse. So Sheriff Fatheree, what impact does PI have on you?
Well, it was extremely important for me when I ran. We have not been we have not been diverse in the sheriff's office for many years. The sheriff's office started in 1840, and it has
Yes.
not always been friendly, I guess, to diverse communities within the organization itself. So
Okay.
30 years I've been in law enforcement, and we have not always treated all of the deputies within the organization fairly and equally. So it was really important to me when I came into the organization as the sheriff to start looking at a more diverse population within the organization itself. Because it has not always been friendly. So diversity, for me, it starts internally. And I think that we have to start changing the way that everybody thinks and interacts, and opening up an opportunity for more people to join our organization. And then I think once we start having that, we have positive communication with one another, and we can start changing the way that we interact as well with the public. So having a diverse organization is the first step in addressing how we communicate with the public. So it's again, it's very important to me.
Thank you, Sheriff. So there's a lot of myths associated with conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusivity. What are some of the myths that you've heard?
Well, there's two things. There are things that are discussed, and then there's a lived experience. And so, the first piece is that, evidence suggests that the conversations around diversity are sometimes, it's a disruptive conversation, because depending on who's in the room and who's leading that narrative, there's often a fear of being ostracized or blamed for the historical context of what's occurred between law enforcement and underserved or minority groups. And so part of the discussion is, in particular, when you talk about diversity management, is it just some pie in the sky organizational performance idea that a lot of organizations push forward. But when you get into having conversations about racial diversity, that creates a greater conflict in some organizations because now there's concern about negative interactions in the workplace and how promotional decisions are now made when you begin to have conversations about race. And then there's also the piece that that's not often talked about is that within that conflict, the grief and loss that some may feel that now when you begin to bring others into the organization, there may be a loss of status and things become unclear on how the organization moves forward. And so those are some of the myths that occur, but the key thing that is most important for all my colleagues here that are here to try to understand this is that creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative is about the benefit of all. Most law enforcement leaders can really determine how fair their practices are by looking at the type of complaints they're currently receiving through grievances and other forms of interactions that occur within the workplace. Sometimes you can start there to kind of have an understand of what's happening with the different generations, the style of management that's taking place, and how that's actually impacting your current employees' experience. And then you can begin to assess your climate to determine what are some of the strategic steps you can actually to create more fairness within the workplace.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. So I think it's a great question. It's a good segue for our next question. So a key tenet in DEI is unlearning the defensiveness related to missteps and errors. So how do we move from a general feeling of defensiveness to a feeling of shared accountability? You tackle that?
I will. So I know we've been using the word DEI, but I'm gonna kind of shift the narrative a little bit, and I'm going to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Because what we're talking about is a greater and broader understanding of what this actually means from an operational perspective. And so if we look at equity first, the first step you want to start with, you really want to try to understand if your policies and practices and your culture is equitable. Is there any aspect of the way you operate that may keep others out within the system? So then when you begin to look at diversity, it's not just racial diversity, but does the organization support different perspectives and whom are you recruiting to? Because ideally, once you begin to bring different people in the organization, you really want them to thrive. And so it is so important for those managers and leaders to really possess those cross-communication skills so that they can bring that inclusion in and you can bring those diverse experiences in and help managing people transition through these challenges, but also they're able to fully contribute into the organization's missions. And that's where the real value comes in, and really having a discussion around equity, diversity, and inclusion. But it really is about a commitment to improving the process for everyone. And that's really where it starts.
So if that's where it starts, Spirit Fatheree, you have been a staunch leader for trying to diversify your organization. Can you tell me what are some of the necessary leadership characteristics when implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion?
The leadership characteristics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think within our organization, I think that giving everybody an equal opportunity, having everyone on a equal playing field, truly looking at what a person has done in their career, what their goals and their plans are, and giving every single person the equal opportunity of advancement. The leadership portion is the most important portion of all of them growing, I guess. What I've done within our organization is I've added additional training and I've started emphasizing leadership. I have allowed through a conversation that's a 4-hour conversation each week with within our organization, for them to start talking about what diversity, equity, inclusion truly is, and having hard conversations and listening. I think the most important thing of everything that we're talking about today is listen to understand. And if a leader listens to understand, I think that that changes the entire demographic of relationships and how they are going to move forward. I hope that answered your question.
And I want to piggyback off of that. You know, the key piece in the characteristics of the ideal leader is you first have to understand that in context of work, this is really a change initiative. And oftentimes it's a culture shift. And so the leader has to be willing to suspend judgment, as kind of somewhat of what the sheriff indicated, but they also have to be able to work towards a high level of awareness of their own culture and how their own identity shows up at work and how that lends itself towards decisions. But the other key piece is that you really want someone who has the ability to build guiding coalitions across multiple segments of society. Oftentimes, when you're not going to have the answers on how to engage with everyone, but having that ability to just sit and listen and to engage and to broaden your insight, that is key, because as you know, you have multiple generations that are currently in the workplace, and they all have different perspectives and needs. And so it's incumbent upon us to be able to sit and listen long enough to understand what do they need in the midst of all this change that is currently taking place. I mean, you still have COVID. Some of us are dealing with recruitment and retention crisis and funding shortages. And so you have to be able to sit and recognize how your employees are impacted through all these changes and be able to guide them through that process.
So, Commander Redhorse, what success outcomes has your organization realized from diversity initiatives or best practices?
Thank you, Thomas. I think a lot of the success outcomes that we have here in Navajo Indian country comes down to the unity of mission. That we want to crystallize within our staff, that we want to be reliable, responsive, and trustworthy. That every action that we take from the different levels of identifying diversity, inclusion, and equity comes to that happenstance. How do we create those conditions that establish that solid paradigm? And I think for us, it's the success of recruitment. We hear our brothers and sisters within our profession having that difficulty of recruiting. And a good portion of that for us is pointing out to our core cultural values. It says, we're not your contemporary law enforcement agency. We want to assure that we're trying to engage the family environment to the most infinitely regressive level that we can. And that in turn has gotten a positive message. Just this past class, we were at our historic high of 32 recruits for one of our quarter sessions. This upcoming class, Shiprock Police District will be submitting 12 recruits to the Naval Police Academy with that same message. So I think it's the diversity message and ensuring that we get a larger message shows to the success of recruitment and retention. The second issue is that globalization that we're talking about, right? In order to solve the problems that are local, we have to ensure that we're within a larger coalition of groups. Non-profit organizations are my favorite organizations to work with. They have more empowerment. They're better capable than our static governmental bureaucracies in order to resolve questions and problems. A significant problem that we're facing now in Indian country is murdered missing Indigenous women. And as a result, we have to not only get we have to be humble because a lot of the families have been traumatized by the process. So being the first responder, being the first individual there, we have to be responsive to their outlook. We have to give them that particular time to express their dissatisfaction with us before we can lead to identifying how we're going to solve those larger problems. And then the last aspect is the more inclusive and representative that we are of our community and our employee population base, the better it is to advocate for our budgets and ensure that the legislative and executive branch are harmonizing with our needs as a law enforcement program. Because ultimately we cannot pay our mileage rates, we cannot pay our salaries or overtime without ensuring that everyone is aligned with that larger, broader message of ensuring equity and diversity within our employee ranks in addition to our community ranks. Those are the three successes that I would outline.
Thank you, Commander. And for you, Sheriff Fatheree, you've been an advocate for change in your organization. Can you outline some successes that you've had with trying to diversify your organization?
Well, the first thing that I did was create the position of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director. And then when we finally got that position filled, our DEI person, Esther, was able to get a grant for, I think it's $61,000 to help us with recruiting women and minorities. The other thing that we've done is address the faith-based community. We've tried to partner more with the community leaders to ensure that they are helping us to recruit, as well as helping us to partner so that we can better police the communities themselves. You know, with COVID and with crime and everything that's been going on, and in our case, the opioid epidemic that's happening as well, law enforcement can't do it alone, and so you have to ask the help of the community. And in our case, we talked more with the faith-based community, but we've also changed internally the way that we hire. We've started reaching out in minority communities, asking them to consider and becoming a law enforcement officer. We were successful in being the first law enforcement entity in the state of Ohio to hire a Sikh law enforcement officer. And since the sheriff's office, our uniforms and everything are dictated by the Ohio Revised Code, we've actually had to petition the state legislature for religious exemptions in our uniform committee, the way that we dress, so that our Sikh can practice his faith, which is having a beard, and he wears a turban. Instead of us wearing a Stetson, he'll have, we'll put a star on the top of his turban. But we've hired a lot of different communities than what we've ever done before. So I think you have to be open-minded. You have to reach out to the community. You have to go to the faith-based community and encourage them to be a part of this paradigm shift that our country and the world, in fact, is experiencing. So I think you have to be very open-minded, and you have to be genuine. You really have to want people from diverse backgrounds to come to work with you and to be a part of changing the way that we're going to live in the future.
You have your first Sikh officer. Congratulations. I wanted to ask you, so how do you go about changing the cultural aspects of DEI? DEI, the external and internal stakeholders. What kind of conversations do you have to push that paradigm shift?
Well, not everyone is excited about it, as the chief said earlier. I think you just have to have the conversation. You have to open it up, and you have to listen to people. Share with them that we are all better together than we are separately. And we we actually, it's a conversation that happens every single day with every single person. Um, I said earlier, you have to listen to understand. And when I have officers, deputies, or civilians, the public who ask me questions about it, I ask them, what is it that holds them back? What are they afraid of? How can we better serve them? How can we better take care of them? And isn't it more important that we all have a voice and an opportunity? And it's been a very slow change internally, but after 15 months in office, I'm beginning to see a positive reaction, because we have brought people that have never looked like us in the past into the organization. And so between the Bhutanese and Sikh, and we have a German, and we've promoted some LGBTQ women and some Hispanics as well. The different backgrounds are actually changing the culture because they're all seeing that everybody has a voice and an equal opportunity. So you just have to have those conversations. And if you don't have them, you're never going to progress.
Sure. So she mentioned conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What other aspects do you consider?
So based on the way you frame your question, again, this goes back, this has to be a plan change initiative. And so in preparing for your change, we go back to those qualities and characteristics of the leader is their ability to go out and build that guiding coalition, to identify those sponsorships and those people who want to get involved. But here's another myth that is left out of the conversation. You sometimes do want to invite people who don't necessarily agree because they give you perspective that maybe you're not missing in part of your plan. And so you have to listen, because oftentimes people have legitimate reasons as to why they're resisting an idea, but we have to be centered enough to at least listen and understand the perspective and see how actually, if we're missing that point, that may actually help us move our initiative forward. But we're also showing value to the fact that we're modeling inclusiveness, because we're saying we're not only going to deal with people who agree with us, we're going to deal with all diverse perspectives and evaluate that information objectively to decide the best way forward.
So you're talking about cognitive diversity, essentially. Think differently about certain components.
Well, it's a cognitive approach, but mostly what we're talking about are people's feelings. And so when we talk about the reactions and resistance, it's really about how people feel about the idea. And so sometimes you have to recognize that feeling is often rooted in something else. And when time allows, you can get an understanding of why they may be resisting the idea. But sometimes it just comes back to a lack of understanding. When we go back to the first question, is what are some of the myths around diversity, equity, and inclusion? So oftentimes the questions come up is really a lack of understanding. And so my interest in this topic is actually to be able to model the way and to be a resource for my colleagues who say, hey, I just want to be able to have an intentional conversation so that I can best understand and support my organization in moving this initiative forward. And it's one of the reasons why Noble is so critical in these conversations, is that for other organizations, that Noble becomes a resource to you when you want to begin to look at the changing demographics, whether it's in your community or within your police department, and you want to say, hey, I want to have a partner in this, and now we become one of your guiding coalitions in some of your organizational change initiatives.
So how do you respond to leadership when they just say, we just hired, promote the best person of the job, regardless of race or gender? What is your response to that? What's your thought on that? Hire the best person, regardless of race or gender.
My response, that is, but you have to look at the qualities of the person. The qualities that we're looking for law enforcement are pretty much the same, regardless of the gender or the skin of the person that you're hiring. We're looking for honest people with integrity, character, people who want to serve. And those characteristics are the same regardless of who it is that you're dealing with. So when you're hiring, you're looking for the same characteristics. You're just not overlooking someone because of the color of their skin or because of their religion or because of their sexual orientation. The characteristics are the key to all law enforcement as we move forward. So you want people with integrity and character and high moral character as well. You want honest individuals, and you want people who truly want to serve. I think that law enforcement is a calling, and it's not something that everybody is suited for. But that's why when you're hiring people, you've got to look for those basics, those pillars of character. And but if you want to hire more diverse population, you have to go into those communities and look for those people with that character and encourage them to come in. So I don't know that it changes what you're looking for. It just changes where you're reaching for.
Sheriff, for that response. So Commander Redhorse, how did you make diversifying your police department a priority?
Thank you, Thomas. So the Naval Police Organization recently completed one of its strategic studies. And one of the things that we're finding is our police program has to be more representative of our community in the context of those who are non-Indian. That is to say, we have to make a better effort of recruiting Caucasians. We have to make a better effort of recruiting Hispanics and African Americans. And we're in the boat of where we have recruited internally for so long within the exterior boundaries of the Navajo Nation that we're now actually pushing out recruitment in our larger cities. That we're actually moving our recruit drives to the larger metropolitan population centers that border the Navajo Nation. In addition to it, our chief has made a priority of ensuring that we're participating in larger affairs in Phoenix and Denver and Albuquerque and Salt Lake to assure that we put the voice out there that says a Navajo Nation, although it's tribally focused for Diné, we want all of the different perspectives to help us in policing, because remember, for us, we're at that point of that delicate balance of are we going to fully invest in Navajo Diné culture from a traditional standpoint and embrace it in totality, or are the new teaching programs by public school systems really indoctrinating our youth in a different way of life? So as a result, we have to be mindful and flexible of that, and we want to ensure that we're out there recruiting the individuals that are actually coming in to assist us, who are also influencing our youth, who are also influencing the younger generation of Navajo Indian country. The other manner that we're looking at of how we're trying to diversify and ensuring that we get a different way is we want to assure that the competition between command level staff is focused upon their awareness of who they are. By that, I want to say that internally, there are practices that we have to model. Internally, there are practices that we've been taught in the past that want to emphasize that everyone is that five-fingered concept, right? Regardless of what one's color of skin is, their cultural background, that we want to reaffirm that and we want to push it forward. Because I do agree with the sheriff that one's conditions is based upon who they are, what their character is, how they project themselves, and in turn, how they create the conditions of their verbal interview, their verbal interaction, their written skill sets. Because what we're finding here is our Navajo speakers, those that grew up speaking Navajo, we talk backwards. Let me re-say that. We speak in a reverse way than English. So when we verbalize going from Navajo traditional dialogue into English, it's going to sound a little bit backwards, and it's going to sound not educated. But in reality, it's us adopting a second language, and for some of us, a third language, in order to properly expound how we're getting our thought processes out for another person who's been steeped in English language to understand what we're trying to articulate. So even at that level, diversifying how we're speaking with our youth, how we're speaking with our younger adults versus how we would speak with our individuals who are in their 70s, their 80s, and even their 90s. So ensuring that our language program is appropriate for that. And the third level is ensuring that we push out that concept of procedural justice, but looking at it from a Navajo perspective and embracing that view that says that we all have something to contribute to that dialogue. Just like what Deputy Chief was saying, you have to find the naysayers, you have to find those individuals who are against you in order to understand the commonalities of where we sit, and in turn giving everyone ownership over the question at hand.
Well, you sparked my interest, Commander Redhorse, and I just, if you could, talk about procedural justice from a Navajo perspective, briefly.
Well, for the most part, remember, educating the process of the criminal justice system. For us, we have to rephrase the whole methodology according to the direction systems that we have. For instance, if I were to walk into a home, right, we go from the east direction and we walk clockwise, right? We cannot walk counterclockwise. And that also goes back to procedural justice, because just as you cannot enter a home improperly, you cannot improperly apply the criminal justice process. So you can't start at the judgment phase, walking backwards, right? You have to begin at the fact-finding phase, developing the plan, developing the methodologies. And that in turn takes you the cardinal directions, east to south, south to west, west to north, and in turn creates that process, which is flexible, but a thinking process that will dictate to you how you can eventually come to a commonality. An example.
Thank you, Commander. I threw you for a loop, but you answered the question. So in the chat, we have a question. We may have already covered it, but it says, what have you or your organization has done with recruiting to have a broader pool of candidates? What have you done to broader pool of candidates?
So I will tell you that we have to really look at our brand strategy. I mean, when you think about McDonald's, Verizon, Facebook. So we've taken that approach to look at who are we targeting to, and is the message reflective of our core values and whom we want to see within the organization. It is challenging right now to recruit for law enforcement because there are far more opportunities than there are available qualified candidates. However, what's really reassuring is that you really increase your brand equity, and you really have to be strategic in where you go and how often you go and whom you're communicating with. And social media is the key, but also you really have to be out front in your community as often as you can. Oftentimes, we're evaluated on how well we communicate. If we can communicate effectively, that increases our opportunity to promote legitimacy and making sure that everyone has access to these opportunities.
Sheriff Fatheree, I know you mentioned briefly, but what have you done to broaden your pool selection?
Well, we've gone through the high schools, we've gone to universities, we've been out in the community itself. the entire organization is beginning to take the approach of bring a buddy. So when you are out in the public and with your family and you're having dinner, and you have a waiter or a waitress that you think would be amazing in this line of business, we have been actually speaking to everyone. So I think that law enforcement, we have to talk to everybody that we come into contact with, whether it is in a restaurant, whether it is at church, whether you're at the store. So recruiting is continual within the organization. We have had several new officers come in, and they have reached back to friends and family and other officers from other police departments and asked them to come in because they're finding a family environment and a healthy environment with opportunity and growth. And so that's what, I mean, we've been doing it with everyone. Everyone you speak to, every single time, you should be looking for a recruit. So high schools, colleges, churches, community events, restaurants, stores, everywhere that we go.
Very good, thank you. So, how do you personally respond to civilians who comment on career choice as if it is in contrast with your individual identity?
I often get this message from my family when they ask about my career and my career choice. But, my response is how do you improve a system by sitting on the sidelines?
Mhm.
I was fortunate that actually I started my career because I was working at a car wash. And the officers that were coming through to get their patrol cars washed began to engage me in a conversation about, have you considered a career in law enforcement? And now you fast forward nearly 25 years later, here I am sitting in the seat of Deputy Chief of Police. And I credit those officers for taking the time to share with me their experience. And they were white officers. And because it was a white officer, it helped me move beyond my own bias on what I thought law enforcement was. Because I said, he didn't have to stop to talk to this kid at a car wash in an inner city about working in law enforcement. And so when I hear these questions, I also ask more questions because sometimes it's not a question to respond to. It's really about listening. And when the opportunity presents itself, I share with them what my experience has been. And then I offer them context on how we're able to make changes and improvements in our interactions through these dialogues. And that's where it starts.
So I heard you laugh when I guess chuckle a little bit. Sheriff Fatheree, when I asked this question, but how do you personally respond to civilians who have commented on the career choice as if it in contrast with your individual identity?
It's interesting because I'm not a very big person. I'm 5'4" and 135 pounds, and I frequently get from people, "You don't look like a cop." I don't think it's kind of funny because I usually respond, "What does a cop look like?" Law enforcement officers come in all shapes and sizes. And as a woman in law enforcement, I have found in 30 years that I have been able to diffuse more volatile situations, especially when I've responded to a couple of bar fights where a couple of men were had too much to drink and getting into a fight, and I was able to actually charm them into stopping and without me ever having to lay a hand on them. So I think that it's kind of funny when people ask, because the fact that I'm not very big, but I think that women do an amazing job in law enforcement. We bring an entirely different approach. Not saying that we don't have to occasionally fight, but what does a law enforcement officer look like? It looks like every one of us. So And that's what I usually respond with. But it is kind of funny. You're right. People ask, um, why did you get into law enforcement and you don't look like a typical cop? So, and I will tell you, I got into law enforcement because I grew up in a bad neighborhood and I saw a lot of really bad things. And I wanted to save people. I wanted to be the difference. Um, I wanted to make people's lives better and I wanted them to be able to live safer. And I think that that's why giving back to the community, I think that's why everybody wants to become a law enforcement officer.
Leonard, I posed the same question to you. You and I talked about, I think you took a career change, your career path took a change. I think you was trying to be an attorney and indeed pivoted. You talk more about your response to civilians and comment on your career choice as if it is in contrast with your individual identity.
Thank you, Thomas. And one thing I want to highlight for those that are involved is here in Navajo Indian country, the national movement seems to be anti-police. Therefore, you get the judgment value. Therefore, you get the contrast versus your individual beliefs. But here in Navajo Indian country, my problem and the issue that we have as a program is our public is asking, where are you? Why aren't you here? Why aren't you in my chapter district? Why aren't you patrolling our roads in a more comprehensive fashion? Where is the Naval Police Department? So I have the luxury of assuring that I have a very supportive population. And for those that say in maybe a dismissive way, why did you choose law enforcement as a career? It fundamentally goes back down to what our progenitors have taught us. Our progenitors have taught us to live a good life, ensure that we be proactive, ensure that we protect others, ensure that we create that guardian aspect for our people, because we are all knowledgeable about the executive, legislative, and judicial branch of government. With the Navajo Nation, we actually have a national security branch, which predated Department of Homeland Security, because we started from way long time ago. And from that perspective, it's really ingrained within our cultural community that for an individual to be responsible for safety of a community is our leaders, the Anis that are within that community environment. So when people have that derisive attitude towards me, which happens every so often, but not that often, I always harken back to, you have the ability to say that. But remember, there's a lot of positive good coming out from those that wear the uniform. There are those individuals that are going to be those individuals that you're going to call on. We also have to remember that police dispatchers are also there with us, EMS, fire, and assuring that it's through that attitudinal aspect of how we shape our response is going to be more powerful than your negative attitude. And I'll do my best to change your mind in regards to how we treat individuals and how us as a program will protect you, will prevent crime against you, will be accountable for our conduct and our responsibility towards you, and will always be innovative with our different techniques that we apply, because that's our calling. As the sheriff said, it's a direct calling to the manifestation of the betterment of who we are and the better qualities that we want to see within our community. That's my answer back to those individuals that would proceed in that way, Thomas.
Preach, Captain, Commander Redhorse, preach. Thank you for that response. Look, the time now is 1:58, and we come to a close here. But I'm going to pass the baton now to Ryan, who is with the United Way Cleveland chapter.
Thanks, Senator McMillan. Thanks to all of our panelists this afternoon for being so generous with their time and participating in this program. I think this unique sort of intersection between conversations related to diversity, equity, and inclusion and law enforcement are definitely needed to be had. Here in Northeast Ohio, we have a long history of trying to address issues within community policing. And so I was really excited when we were asked to partner on this event. And truthfully, having more of these sort of engaging opportunities is a huge part of the work that needs to be done. There were a few things that came out for me that I just wanted to highlight, especially with regard to something Commander Redhorse said about the cultural procedures. I was fascinated listening and hearing about, the ways that you enter a home and how in acknowledging, your own history as a community, you can do better, more inclusive work. And I think for me, that's the real takeaway message. is thinking about the impact that your presence has in the communities that you occupy. You go into these situations with your own identities, and we can't divorce our work from those identities, just as all three of our panelists were addressing, with regard to the final question. So a huge part of this work is also learning about yourself and your identities and what your own identity means to you and how it guides the work that you do. Because ultimately, we're all a bunch of humans with various fascinating identities trying to figure out how to do better. And especially for our law enforcement, it's really important that they enter into the profession with that sort of open-mindedness of, I want to serve these communities with respect to my own as well. And I think that's hugely important. The other thing I want to plug is that the United Way of Greater Cleveland will be having our next community conversation event on May 19th. It will be virtual. You can learn more information, follow all of our social media to get updates on upcoming events. The final thing that I wanted to add in there is slipping my mind, but it's with regard to the community conversation. That if you're interested, you can also take a look at our archive for some of the similar conversations that we did with regard to the consent decree and how much community feedback we got regarding that. So take a look at our website, make sure to attend our event on May 19th. Again, a huge thank you to all three of our panelists this afternoon. I know how much an hour can mean for you all, so giving even that is greatly appreciated. Thanks again to Lieutenant McMillan and to Magda from Tri-C for reaching out to partner with United Way. Have a great rest of the day. If you are in Cleveland, I'm so sorry that it is snowing right now. If you're not in Cleveland, just be grateful it's not snowing where you are, hopefully. Have a great rest of the week, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commander. Thank you.